On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don, and today on the podcast we have David Sanders. David is a government affairs and public policy individual who focuses also on securing America's drug and supply chain in the U.S. And so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I focus in on helping companies manage complexity and increase performance. So with that, welcome, David.
Thank you, Don. Good to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. First, could you just start with telling the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I think you pointed to it at the opening. I'm a government affairs professional, an advocate, father of three, brother of four brothers, and I've built a career. I've been lucky enough to build a career in government and politics over the last 20 years. Been fortunate enough to work for really great members of Congress, to work with Congress from really great companies, international pharmaceutical companies, international biopharmaceutical companies, as well as pharmacy and the like. So it's been a really fun 20 years, and I've actually seen a lot of the supply chain in the last 20 years. And so that's why I've got a little bit of a unique perspective about the supply chain and the vulnerabilities right now.
Yeah. So what is it that made you interested in government affairs and life sciences? What sort of sparked your interest there?
Well, I was intrigued by politics at a young age, and I ended up working for Senator Fred Thompson. And working for Senator Fred Thompson from Tennessee opened my eyes up to politics and policy. I think it took me a few years to understand that you could really make a difference on policy from the life sciences perspective. And the way I really opened into that was through the lens of intellectual property. I ended up getting a job on Bush Cheney 2004. It was a great opportunity to go run a presidential re-election in North Carolina. And I ended up in Pennsylvania at the very end. And of course, he won that re-election. So at that point, they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to work with business." And so I had two opportunities, energy or commerce. And so I said, "Let's choose commerce." And they said, "Fine, do you want to work on intellectual property? What do you know about that?" And I said, "Next to nothing." But I got a job with the United States Patent and Trademark Office on patent law, trademark law, copyright law for some great individuals, John Dudas and Steve Pincos. And so after that experience for 2.5 years, building awareness of the IP system here in America for small businesses, negotiating the Patent Reform Act of 2005 and 7, and a bunch of other international trade stuff, I decided that I wanted to give back. I wanted to go into life sciences. I was fascinated by innovation, fascinated by pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical law. And I think maybe I poured myself into it because I wanted to give back, because the healthcare system had given my family so much. I'm a triplet. I'm an identical triplet. And one of us, Andrew, almost died twice. And the healthcare system saved him twice. Vanderbilt Hospital saved his life twice. And so I was very intrigued by the notion of going to work in innovative biopharmaceuticals. It just took me about 15 years to get here.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to hear the story of what brings people in, because normally there's some sort of a family tragedy or something that ties all that together. I mean, also your past with Fred Thompson. The interesting thing that I find about Fred is just this idea of going from actor to politician is just an interesting kind of journey, overall. Not that, Ronald Reagan wouldn't have also, been an interesting case study as well. Why, what the heck would have made you want to get into politics after acting? I don't understand, but.
The thing about Fred, though, that's interesting that people don't realize is Fred was a major lawyer. He got into entertainment because he won some big cases for some people that needed help against big corporations. And they came to him. They said, "This is a fascinating story. You lifted up this lady. Uh, we're going to write a movie about it. Do you want to be in the movie?" He said, "Yes." But that was after he had actually served on the Watergate Committee. Fred Thompson was the general counsel of the Watergate Committee, and people don't know that. They forget
Yeah.
that. So Fred was on the legal side of politics long before he was in politics.
The things I learned in this podcast, I tell you, that one I didn't know either. So it's very interesting. So you work for Coherus. What sort of problems does Coherus look to solve in the industry?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Coherus because it's a fascinating story. It's an interesting and unique story because it was built out of a good law. The good law that I'm referring to is the biosimilars pathway that was placed inside of the ACA in 2010. I was at Teva Pharmaceuticals at the time. We contributed to that law in big ways. We contributed about 3 or 4 of the provisions of that law from the generic industry. And so I helped to sort of negotiate the final trappings of that law with the great help of Senator Stabenow, Senator Schumer, Senator Enzi, may he rest in peace, and others. And so when that bill passed, we created a pathway for generic biotech for the first time ever in this country. And what I didn't know at the time is that a company was going to be created, literally whole cloth, out of that bill, and that was Coherus. Denny Lanfear created Coherus because of that bill, and he created it as an Amgen executive, as an Amgen veteran, as a biotech bioengineer. He created it to give back. Actually, he really did. He created it to create generic versions of biotech drugs and to give back to the system because he knew how to make biotech drugs. And so he said to a bunch of his friends, "Let's do this. Let's get together." They did it 5 months after that law passed. And it took us 9 years, or this company, it took 9 years for us to launch our first product. But it was the best biotech launch in history to that point for the U.S. We gained about 30% market share. We launched our drug at 30% below the originator. So we were really created as a pure play biotech. The cool thing about Coherus now, 2 years into my tenure here, is it's going to be a biotech that also innovates in immuno-oncology. And again, I'm sorry about my allergies. But it's a unique company that launches at value propositions for the government and saves the government a lot of money while improving access to these complicated drugs.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important sort of part of the journey that I feel like a lot of different drug companies, they have a patented drug that eventually becomes a generic or has the opportunity to sort of transition, and it's interesting to me to see how that transition starts to happen.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, look, it's challenging to launch a pure play biosimilar because the whole way the system works right now, which is very flawed, it does not allow for sustainability. The way the whole rebate system works, Congress is looking at that now, but really no big changes have happened in that space in the last decade. It actually does not favor these, what I call competition drugs. It does the opposite. But we were able, as Coherus, to create a pure play biosimilar. We've got 3 biosimilars that will be out by next July, competing with high cost drugs, some of the highest cost drugs in Part B and Part D. And we're going to be competitors with a number of other companies, and we're going to bring down the price of those drugs. It's just going to happen. It's factual. But it needs to happen in a more tailored fashion. It needs to happen with the support of government. because government's the one that created this pathway. But the problem is that the commercial system doesn't really allow for a huge boost in these drugs in terms of utilization. So there's still issues we deal with every day. But the exciting thing about Coherus is we did the opposite of what you just said. We created biosimilar drugs to give us cash flow to invest in immuno-oncology novel drugs. And that's what we're going to be, is an immuno-oncology novel drug company that also delivers value both through its novel drugs and its biosimilars.
Very exciting. So you're also leading a group called Securing America's Medicines and Supply. What are they focused on?
That group is focused really on normalizing and building consensus for government policy to increase domestic supply of everything from pharmaceuticals to biopharmaceuticals to personal protective equipment. We looked at the landscape back in 2020 when I got here, and we saw that there was an opportunity to finally overcome some of the flaws and the gaps in government policy that I saw when I was back at Teva Pharmaceuticals. Back then, we had a heparin scandal from a Chinese-produced drug, and I think we lost something like a couple dozen Americans to tainted heparin. This is a blood thinner that's available to 30 million patients a day, and that should never happen. So that's how we created in this country the advent of FDA inspections abroad. You might say that was great, and end of story. Not end of story. It still doesn't work well enough. The FDA has experienced massive shortages because of COVID, massive delays in travel and inspections. They're not doing it quite enough, I think, to sort of harmonize with other countries and to do sort of virtual inspections. So I think that one of the problems is we need a new refresh look from Congress at how do we incentivize and pay for our drugs, and why are our drugs largely made outside of the U.S. So I'm not one of these sort of people that say that all of our products need to be made here. I'm fully aware of the global supply chain and respectful of it, but we need incentivization in this country to increase the domestic production of critical drugs, whether it's biosimilars, biologics, or critical generics that are treating COVID-19 patients or prenatal patients.
Yeah, one of the things that I really had hoped would happen with what we saw with the creation of vaccines and drugs for COVID would have been an acceleration, of a pathway for approval, right? That we would have had to have figured out a different methodology working with the FDA to try and just figure out how do you get things safely to market without actually taking so much time, because I mean, if you're a smaller biotech today, the cost alone is just tremendous as well.
Yeah, it's exorbitant. I mean, the Congress has stepped up. Energy and Commerce and Health Committee, every 5 years they reauthorize the FDA. They're doing that right now, and there's great leaders like Diane DeGette, Fred Upton, and others Senator Richard Burr, who have made pathways that are easier for acceleration, right? Acceleration of approval. We are actually a breakthrough technology. And so we have special designation by the FDA under our Terrell-B application. So there has been advances, but I agree with you 100%, both in terms of biosimilars, but also novel drugs. We need quicker ways to get to market, and we really need quicker reimbursement mechanisms for adoption of breakthrough technology, but also biosimilars. Both of them are to be rewarded, right? These are not Me Too drugs. These are innovative drugs or drugs that have the same impact, but at a much lower cost to the government. The way to drug pricing, in my view, is to boost biosimilars.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that would also help the overall capabilities in the marketplace. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. What's one important lesson that you've learned in your career that shapes what you do?
Well, I think actually the lesson that I would say I learned from a bunch of my bosses and from a bunch of mistakes too that I've made. I think that there's a little too much in policy making, but also generally in life, seeking permission rather than asking for forgiveness. I think the way good policy is made is by um, putting your neck out there, building a coalition, and going and asking for help. And I think that the Made in America campaign that's on right now has legs because not only because the shutdowns from COVID-19, but because it's the right thing to do. So it's virtuous. And we need to do more to maybe spend a little bit more periodically for a high quality American product. Um, this is a message. I just spent about 2 days with my CEO here, about 12 meetings. And this is a message that resonates with politicians, with the agencies, with the White House. This administration has endorsed it through executive committee action, through a new CMS rule that actually says if you're an American made N95, we should pay more for you. Of course, Celeste Drake is an amazing leader at the White House at the Office of Management and Budget, and she says sometimes, periodically, we should pay more for a high quality American made product. So I think what I've learned in my career is that the best thing to do, either professionally or sometimes personally, is just do something. And if you do something, then you're pushing it out there, and you're pushing out the idea, and then you can see if you can advance it. It's very, very challenging right now to pass major law inside of this Congress in an election year. But I think it's not impossible, especially if it's got a virtuous, non sort of humble aim. And actually, I think that from PPE to biopharmaceuticals to medical products and devices, I think that it's not a controversial thing, and it should not be a controversial thing to say we're made in America.
Yeah, I mean, I remember even as a kid. I mean, there were major Made in America, kind of campaigns that happened, as I was growing up, and that allowed, I think, of American businesses, to gain a lot of legs. The one thing I know in our, sort of pre-discussion that I talked about as well was just the whole idea that, that we also, have seen, um, just this opportunity, to bring production of drugs back to the U.S. as well, especially with vaccine manufacturing and things like that. So I do look forward to seeing some of this gain legs as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the time is now. I think the last 6 or 8 weeks we've seen in the war in Ukraine that this could be extremely disruptive to the economy, but also to surety of supply. I mean, every day now, the supply chain is making headline news, as is inflation. So we can't really sit around and wait. We have a significant amount of manufacturing happening in China and India. And I'm not criticizing those countries in particular, but it's a fact. And if you can't get the product from there to here, then we have vulnerabilities. 80% of our acetaminophen is made in one of those two countries. 80% of our needles and syringes that inoculated all of us against COVID-19 came from one of those two countries. 80% of our statins, our drug statins that 30 million Americans take every day, are made in one of those two countries. And what if there was a China-Taiwan conflict? What if Russia and Ukraine ended up much worse than it is right now? You're going to see drug product not coming out of Poland. You're going to see distribution of starter product be disrupted from India and China. So I think on a foreign policy level, which is actually my secondary interest in politics years ago, 20 years ago, I think we have to recognize that health security is security, and it is also national security. And so I think we don't quite have that recognition where it needs to be yet. We got to keep doing the hard work at DOD, at the White House, and in Congress to advance laws like the Made in America Act, like the American Made Pharmaceuticals Act, which would actually force, for the first time ever, Medicare to say, hey, maybe an American made pharmaceutical product is better than its counterpart and should be paid for a little differentially. That's it. It's very, very non-controversial, especially when it's a competition drug, when it's already lower cost than the alternative, which is what our business is built around.
Very interesting. So again, what is a little bit of advice that you would give somebody that maybe is just getting started in their career in life sciences?
Look, it took me 15 years really to land in life sciences. So I think it's challenging when you're not a chemist, you're not a biologist, you're not a trained scientist. My CEO is a good example of somebody who went that route and became a businessman and an engineer inside of biotechnology. But if you're like me and you studied history and English, you had no idea what you're going to do with your life. I think the one thing I would say is be assertive, ask questions, build a network, and go and ask for. You can't really get anything unless you ask for it. So go ask for an internship at a biotech company. Go ask for an internship at a biopharmaceutical company. Go ask for a job at a big pharma. And I think that's the quickest way to do it, or to get into Congress and start working on these policies from the inside. I think I've been lucky, but again, it took me 15 years to get here. And so I think, I did make some active decisions in my life, very few of them, but one of them was to go into health policy because I wanted to give back leading the government. And so I had a little base of knowledge from my intellectual property days, and I used that to my benefit, but it did take a long time to get over here. I think there's a lot of great entrepreneurialism going on in biotech in the country right now, and it's exciting. You got gene therapy, you've got all sorts of oncology innovation happening. And frankly, I think as a country, we sort of did not celebrate enough of what you talked about. The advent of the vaccines against COVID 19, the advent of therapies against COVID 19. That was extraordinary science at its highest level with a great outcome. We got Paxlovid from Pfizer, we got Molnupiravir from Merck, we've got probably 10 other antivirals and antivirals and antibiotics, antivirals and antibodies, that are ready for the government to invest in the next 2 years so that we don't have to go through a problem like this again. So I think the innovation in this industry is extraordinary. It's a great time to try to join it.
Yeah, it's just watching what happened. And I mean, the one thing that I know I've heard repeatedly in terms of like the vaccines and other things, that, the one thing people can't believe is how quickly we came up with a vaccine, including me. I mean, I'm also, in that same or similar sort of camp that, I was pretty shocked at the speed that we did it. But whenever you watch the science and kind of where things were based in terms of, the levels of knowledge that we had, it all came from this idea that, the science can broadly be, applied against, anything with a spike protein. And so, that's what sort of, led us to this, key point and being able to innovate fast. And then, to your other point about, being an outsider or a non-scientist, I'm similar. I mean, I started out in the technology realm and, very much made my way into healthcare and then diagnostics and sort of made this journey a bit differently, but it took me a while to get here as well. But it is interesting to see how many scientists are so happy to share their wealth of knowledge with you as well, and just say, hey, look, here's the basics of what's happening here.
I couldn't agree more, but by the way, you're being a little too humble. You've got a PhD and an MBA. I see it right there. You're much more qualified in this space than I am. But I will say this. You talk about really great professionals willing to share their knowledge. I experienced that today. I was on the phone with some government employees who could be making 5 times what they make. And they have a passion for this stuff, and they want to advance technology, and they want to make a difference for patients. They do it every day. And there's a lot of good people like that here in Washington, D.C., and we get a bad rap. D.C. gets a bad rap. But I just wanted to support ASPR and BARDA. These are agencies that advance therapeutics, that advance the vaccines, that advance the diagnostics, that got us through this pandemic. They advanced, I think, 162 different technologies in the last decade. It's a great agency. It's a great example of how government can work with the private sector, and it needs to be boosted. It needs to be supported, just like the biosimilars that we support. That agency and its parent company, Asper, need to be boosted right now. And I think Congress, by the end of the summer, they've got to get out and get us another COVID package so that those agencies can continue to do the great work of advancing true innovation. The great thing about those agencies, the last thing I'll say is they step in when a company faces the huge sort of threat of being unfunded. These agencies step in and fund those innovations to get them through for the benefit of the American people and the American government. So I think it's way high time that we supported them. Operation Warp Speed was amazing, but in a weird way, it undermined those agencies. And so we've got to get back to supporting them.
Yeah, it's, I mean, so true. And, just so critical that we do keep, there's a reason why our government's, structured the way that it is. My only sort of, general stance is that, this idea of Congress people pointing fingers at each other and saying we can't get anything done is unacceptable. If you worked in a company and that was your sort of response, you'd be quickly out of a job and out on the street. So that's sort of my quick response to Congress is I don't care how you guys figure out how to work together, go do it. You paid a lot of money to go do it.
Yeah, it's working really closely with Congress the last 20 years. It's a bit of a racket, right? That phrase, that rhetoric, that we can't get anything done, we're divided. I will say it has gotten harder every single year. Every single year I've been here, but it's a racket. It's a rhetorical racket, and it's not true because they actually do get stuff done. We're seeing the Senate Health Committee advance the refunding of FDA. We're seeing things move in Congress that are meaningful. So I think we just don't talk about the positive things in this country enough.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So, in terms of the challenges that you've run into this year, the biggest challenges that you've seen, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've had this year?
Well, I think it actually gets back to a little bit of what I was just saying. It is challenging to take a good idea, introduce it in Congress, and advance it because there's only a couple of vehicles. There's only a couple of big packages that get put together now. We're heading into the summer. We're in the summer. We're heading into the July 4th break, and then we've got only a few days of legislating before the August break. Everybody's busy on the campaign trail. We just had a night full of primaries last night. So things are heating up on the political front, on the rhetorical front, but they're not heating up quick enough, I think, for Made in America domestic policy. And so I think we're going to have to look to the end of the summer, to the beginning of the fiscal year in September, and to December to try to get some of these things done that we were talking about earlier, like the Made in America Act. Great bill, endorsed by the Health Committee and others, and would create, for the first time in a long time, a Puerto Rico-like tax credit for domestic manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. That should be done. It should be done by the end of this year. That would help some of our partners. It wouldn't help Coherus, but I'm still advocating for it every day because it's a good thing. So that needs to get done. So I think the biggest challenge is finding a way to advance good consensus policy, and that's why we created SAMS. We've got great partners there. I should have mentioned them earlier. Sorry I didn't, but we got Teva Pharmaceuticals. We've got AmerisourceBergen. Amneal Pharmaceuticals is an under-the-radar generic that's producing a vast majority of its generics here on American soil. Great. We've got other companies like US Biologic that's got a Lyme disease vaccine for us to finally slow the proliferation of Lyme disease, which I think I had when I was 12, by the way. So I think 14% of the world population has Lyme disease. We don't have Lyme vaccines for humans, but we now have Lyme vaccine for animals. So we've got to stop that. That's what US Biologic is going to do. So those are some of the projects we're working on. iRemedy Healthcare is an still under the radar company that did the deal for 1 billion needles and syringes with Operation Warp Speed. They're a partner of ours at SAMS, and we love working with them. They're bringing solutions to the American government every day. So it's exciting work. It's challenging, yes, to advance big policy, but it's sort of exhilarating to be in the fight and to be at the table. Because as you know, if you're not at the table, you're on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. What is one thing that you're going to start doing this year? And then a follow-on question, what's one thing that you're going to stop doing this year?
I think I would say that I'm going to start playing tennis. I got to get some exercise. I'm in my mid 40s now. The one thing I'll stop doing is I'll stop not putting America first. How about that?
Sounds good.
Good
So
to see
we're
you.
up to the final 3 questions in the interview. The first one is, what inspires you?
I think being the underdog inspires me. I was always little, playing sports, and maybe underestimated, and I take a lot of joy in that. Um, but I honestly look to Senator Fred Thompson, Senator Marsha Blackburn, who I work for. I look to some of my previous bosses for inspiration every day, frankly.
Very good. And what concerns you?
I think the state of the country is terrible right now. It's worse than it was 2 years ago when it was pretty bad. It really concerns me that we can't sort of focus on the positive and get stuff done and actually get back to being, confident again in ourselves and stop fighting amongst each other. I mean, the Europeans and others around the world must look at us and just roll their eyes because we're the greatest country the world has ever known, and I still believe that, but we're sitting here fighting amongst ourselves, and we've got to get over it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point. I mean, one of the things that I know I reflect on quite frequently is, how do we find our way forward from here? With so much infighting going on, just how do you find your way forward? And that's where I get stuck is, I hope that, there is a point in time where we all look back and go, man, I'm glad those times are gone.
It's coming. It's got to come. I don't know when it'll be, but maybe 2026, 2028, something like that. But in the meantime, I just try to ignore all of the noise. I don't watch cable news at all. I read the newspaper, but I don't watch cable news. Cable news is corrosive, as is social media, at least to me.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have gone on that news diet as well. Last question: what excites you?
Honestly, building great partnerships with great teams. To be honest with you, I mean, it took me a long time to realize that both in government and in business and in your personal life, really, it's about personality. It's about people. People make things happen. Governments don't make things happen. And so I think what I've enjoyed so much at Coherus is joining a very small company with a great personality, so to speak, and trying to make things happen for innovation for patients. That's been rejuvenating. That's been exciting for me. And the teams that I've built around me, that are literally around me right now, are extraordinary. Great people who are willing to work really, really hard. And what I've learned is you can learn a lot of things, but if you bring the right attitude to it, that's the right sort of person to be working with. And so I'm thrilled to work with a lot of great people at DC and try to advance the cause for SAMS, but also for Coherus in a humble way. And I think it all starts with good people, to be honest with you, who are willing to put in some sweat equity and try to advance change. It's a hard thing to do, but it's been exhilarating.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to have just good teams and good people that are all working towards that common cause and really driving things forward. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. David Sanders, thank you so much for being a guest on the Life Science Success Podcast. It was great to have you here.
Can I just thank you because I love LinkedIn because LinkedIn is how we found each other. Thanks for all your work done. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.